This is Gary Peterson. Trudy is in Taiwan. Plane has landed and she's on her way between the airport and her hotel. There's a 12-hour time difference. But she may join us later. I'm not sure. Anyway, just to say, this is our last program of the spring season. We'll start out again in September 14, with Howard Crystal, who is at the Center for Biological Diversity, and he's going to discuss diversity of species. Just to remind everyone, this session is being recorded. Our guest this evening is Marcus Kyd. Marcus has been with us at least once and maybe twice. I can't remember. I remember what was it, Marcus? The Sappho
Yes,
poem?
the
Yeah,
Sappho adaptation. That's right. Yeah.
right. That became a production at Taffety Punk. Marcus is one of the famous Taffety Punk theater group that is calls Chaw's its home, the black box there, and they have won a number of Helen Hayes nominations, and the actors that are part of the group have won. Well, and for that matter, authors of plays have won Helen Hayes awards. Maybe not necessarily for something performed at the theater, but uh, certainly they're members of the theater company. Tonight, Marcus is going to talk about his, I hate to call it a one-man show since you have a bartender in there, but it's a one-man show that he recently finished at Chaw's, and for which he got a Helen Hayes nomination. And clearly, in error, the awards people didn't give him the Helen Hayes Award, even though they should have. Marcus is
Yeah.
going to talk a little bit about about the Beowulf production, and then he's going to perform for us part of Beowulf. Now, I'm sure all of you have, well, I shouldn't say that, but I'm almost positive that all of us have probably in either high school English or in college English, were confronted with Beowulf at some point. I know I detested it when I read it in high school. We didn't read the whole thing, but we read an excerpt, and I thought it was very difficult and quite stupid, as I recall. A few years ago, I read it again with Trudy. We read the Seamus Haney's translation, and I found it very enjoyable. So I guess I matured a little bit in that regard. So, Marcus, why don't you just take it away, and maybe you could start out by telling us why Beowulf, for God's sakes?
Indeed. First of all, hello everybody, and thank you so much for having me here. So, one of my artistic hang-ups is that I am deeply obsessed with classical material, and very often for me, the older the better. So, I've always loved the Greeks. I have even voluntarily read some of the Roman plays. Um, and and the Beowulf story was always fascinating to me. I think, like Gary, I encountered it first in college, and we had a horrible translation of it. It was very just pragmatic, and these are the maybe it was a little bit too literal, and so the idioms of Old English didn't really like become the idioms of modern English very well because the translator wasn't even trying to do that. However, I was 19 years old and there were swords, and that was super exciting for me as a young man. So I stuck with it, you know. And occasionally it would come up again. I'd come back to it. And by the time Seamus Heaney's translation came out, I picked it up again, and that really opened my eyes to what it was. His introduction to it was beautiful. And I encourage anybody to read even just that. But his obviously his masterful skill as a poet, um, and his I would say the Irish rhythms that he uses really made this poem just leap forward. I couldn't put it down. I told Gary last week, I actually read the whole thing in one night, and then I think immediately started it again. It was just so beautiful to me. So at the time, there I was, right? 30 years old. And I thought, oh, I should perform this. I should memorize the whole thing and perform it. And I'm glad I did not do that, right? Because that's 5 hours that none of us would ever get back. But as time went on, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I kept coming back to it. And here I am now, much later, much later, and I'm blessed to have this theater company. And one of the things I do with the company is encourage the company members to follow their dreams, right? And we try to give them the space and time to develop or adapt things, so that they can pursue their artistic visions. And I thought, oh, it might be my turn for that. And the company started helping me with Beowulf. There's a story in there that's, I'm finally going to answer Gary's question. There's a story in there about heroism that is so pure, because it's really, if you get past the I don't know, cultural sort of violence of what's happening in Scandinavia in the Dark Ages, um, there's a real altruism in Beowulf, that he goes into things largely not concerned with himself at all, but with helping people. And I felt like that was a story that deserved to be told.
Okay. Um,
Long answer, sorry.
well, I was just curious. You mentioned one translation, and
Mm.
I seem to remember seeing you in the corner in Jimmy T's many times with many other books and I don't know, a dictionary of what would that be? Middle English or Old
Old
English?
English, yep, yep, yep.
Old
Mhm.
English. Uh, so what did you use as references? What were your sources to come up with the play?
I'm glad you asked. So all of these I was reading at any time, right? For the 6 months before we started workshopping it, right? The two really standouts for translation, and I don't know how much, experience anybody has with Old English. What I love about it is the closer you get to it, it starts to, if somebody's doing it well, you start to hear what stayed in English. And quite a few words are exactly the same. Um, these to me are the standout translations. This one, Seamus Heaney, really can't be topped. This is a recent one by Maria Devana Headley. Um, and her whole approach, and she says if you want the sort of story of Beowulf, and want like somebody who really honors it, go for it. Those translations are out there. To her, it sounded so much like a man telling a story at a bar that she translates there's the first word of Beowulf is what, which many people translate as lo, or hark ye, or hear ye, or some introductory call, right? And she translates it as bro, like a guy sitting down to tell a story, right? And it's a lot of fun. Um, not not always, worrying about purity of translation, but a lot of fun. Um, and so all of those things inspired us, and we sat down as a company with like 10 other actors reading these things out loud to us to see like what the differences were, and what we wanted if we wanted to pull from different versions. And eventually it became clear, okay, we're going to have to adapt this ourselves. And using Maria Devana Headley's idea, like, this is a barroom tale that works. And I think originally the idea is that it would be somebody in the corner of the mead hall with a harp, singing this story of Beowulf. Um, and so we thought we should adapt it into modern English as a storytelling event, and it would be me with a guitar. And then the most useful book was actually I don't know if everybody can see this. It gets a little blurry, I think, with my camera, but this is a transcription, word for word translation by Benjamin Thorpe. And the Old English is on this side, and modern English is on this side. And my director, luckily, Chris Curtis was my director. He's also a linguist. So while we were adapting it and pulling ideas from all the other translators, that became invaluable to us because that was as close as we were going to get to the source material of Old English, and having it in front of us and having this linguist in the room that's like, well, this word demon could also mean this, really helped us sort of narrow down a lot of our choices. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I love that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I'm still reading Beowulf. I was in Jimmy T's the other day reading another translation of Beowulf, and my friends are like, what is happening? Didn't you do the show?" And I'm like, I'm always reading this poem. Sorry.
Um, uh, isn't Beowulf originally was poetry, wasn't it?
Indeed.
And um, so what did you decide to do about the poetry aspects, and how did you solve that? Because I don't know what the rhyming pattern was, but maybe you can go into that a little bit. But
Oh, yeah, sure, sure, sure. So like the most of the classical epics, right? Like the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Aeneid, like there's hundreds of them. It is in verse, but the Germanic form that Old English is sort of Old English is very you know Dark Age Western Lowlands Germanic language, right? Um, and their poetic form was not based on rhymes and I'm not sure if it was even syllabic the way that Shakespeare is like in iambic pentameter. But the rules of the verse making was um, that there were like two half lines, and alliteration was key in them. So two words would alliterate in the first half line, and then the first stressed syllable in the first line would have to alliterate with two words in the second line. So, just describing it, it sounds really, really complicated, but when people got good at it and and almost always sung it with their harps, it's kind of an incredible skill, that as English evolved and moved away from those sounds and brought in French and Latin and everything else, our poetry needs became different, and by the time Chaucer was writing, we had sort of walked away from alliterative verse. That's what they call it now, alliterative verse. Um, this would not work, I think, for us because the sort of backflips you have to do to try and follow that form, and many translators have tried, and I've read a few of those. Um, you just start sacrificing a lot to try and mimic that form that is not a form that we use the way we currently speak English. Um, so we abandoned that pretty early, and then I think I might have mentioned this to you, Gary, a while ago, but there's a woman in the world named Xanthi Gresham. She's British. She's of Persian descent. And she's a great actor, but her last 10 years or so of her life, she's been digging into Persian folk tales. And these are also things that are sung and may rhyme or not. But um, she just gets up on stage in sort of classical dress and has a musician playing classical Persian instruments next to her. And she comes every year for the Norwuz Festival over at the Smithsonian. And it's just captivating, the way she delivers these stories. And, her storytelling mode when she's activated is very much like, um, very structured and very, like she really knows what she's doing. And then occasionally she drops out and helps you get to whatever this part of the story was, right? And I love this balance between like her as the like storyteller character and her as the performer going, you can get this, you can totally understand this. And so that really had a big inspiration on me. And I saw her a few times over the last 4 years, and the more I started thinking about how are we going to adapt this? I really started thinking of Xanthi's show. It was like, oh my gosh, this might be the way. So, so, after a time, I tried to write, and then I thought, I think what I need to do, and the Capitol Arts Workshop was awesome about this. I was like, I think I need to lock myself in a room over there for 2 weeks and record myself telling the story to just see what my natural rhythms are, and so there I was studying my own storytelling tendencies, but that's eventually how we ended up writing the script.
What, since it's so long and you had to adapt it, what what did you leave on the cutting room floor? How did you decide what to leave out?
That's a great question because I hate oh man, I want to you want to keep everything in, right? Especially if you're in love with this stuff the way I am. Early,
Right.
I had a director, Chris Curtis, like I said, and then our secret weapon at Taffety Punk is a dramaturg named Tiffany Bryant, and she's awesome because she helps us research things and sort of helps us guide like okay, maybe this is, not relevant and you can throw that away. And it's good to have those other voices in the room, because eventually I end up getting a little bit too in love with things and I need somebody to cut something, for me that I'm not seeing. What we decided was there are three big events in Beowulf's life. Well, according to this story, there seem to be a lot of events in Beowulf's life, but this story focuses on three really big fights. And that's Grendel, as everyone knows, and Grendel's mother. And then the one a lot of people forget about is the dragon at the end, which to me is what the whole thing is leading up to. So we said, okay, we're definitely going to do those. And then as storytellers, right, each event needs a setup. So we're going to keep anything that is related and helps us with the setup of that event. And then you have a little bit of consequence, right, after each one of those. So then you get a sort of rhythm in storytelling where it's like, beginning, middle, end, which leads to the next beginning, middle, end, which leads to the ultimate beginning, middle, end. And the show ended up happening in three parts like that. Um, and then we started watching the clock. There was a lot of stuff that the poet who wrote Beowulf goes off on these side journeys. My son calls them, because he's a D&D player, side quests, and you start hearing about these other battles that Beowulf's not part of, or you hear about their history, or Hrothgar's family, or another king that nobody wants to be like, and um, and we really had to think about, okay, if this doesn't affect the story, why is it here? Um, and and that got to be fun because we cut a lot of that stuff, but occasionally it was so relevant. This there was this one story about. Um, a very bad king, right? And one of the beautiful things we discovered while we were going through this examination process was there's an idea that keeps recurring in the poem about how a good leader shares and protects his or her people, right? So these kings and queens that they adore are very generous with the wealth, right? And people are always being rewarded, and that's sort of the exchange in these cultures. And then they had a story about one king who absolutely did not do that, and the devastation he caused, and it's an amazing warning to the people of this story. And we thought, okay, we love this. It seems to help us understand the rest of it. but we don't really want to get into the genealogy of Haramid and all this other stuff that they're talking about. And we were like, what is this like for us, right? And then we started thinking with some of these side quests, we could do modern storytelling, or tie it to something we all know. So the dramaturg was like, well, he sounds like Nicolae Ceausescu. And we were all like, oh, yes. So there's a page in the script that is me breaking out of the Beowulf poem. And just to let everybody know what this is like, talking about Nicolae Ceausescu and how he lived and how he died, before we get back to the main narrative. But that was a way to compress a lot of these things so that we could stick to those three big events.
That isn't who I was thinking of, but that's a
Indeed, a
good
lot
choice.
of indeed, yes. Many options out there. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh, I noticed Trudy is on. Trudy, if you want to say anything or ask any questions, please cut in if you want to. Uh, what about I was wondering, what about, explain to me what you did about the harp and the how did the bartender come in here? What's their role?
Yes. Well, we wanted to replicate the mead hall, right? Um, and this idea of the scop, right, who sings in the corner of the mead hall while everybody's celebrating. And the mead hall is not just, I think, the transmission place for these stories. But in Beowulf specifically, so much of the action actually takes place inside of a mead hall that Hrothgar built,
Hmm.
right? The famous Heorot. Uh,
Right.
so when we started thinking, oh, is this happening in a bar? Oh, did we build a bar? We started talking to Capital Arts Workshop about if we could do cabaret tables and have a bar just in the room. And they got really excited about that idea. Those people, I love the people over there. They're just so pro art, you know. Um, and and then my house managers were like, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we sell drinks during the show, right? Because if you want it to feel like a bar, it should feel like that. So I laughed at myself because we were testing where to put the tables or how to set up the stage and where the bar should go and like what would be the best thing theatrically for that look, right? And then when we got the sort of platform set up and the bar where it was supposed to be, I realized, oh, I just essentially rebuilt the Black Cat from 1995, which is where my band used to play. Um, but that setting became so fun for us because it also allowed us to interact with the audience a little bit more, you know. And the bartenders were never really they didn't have lines, you know, they weren't like part of the show, but they were helping build the atmosphere in there, you know, and we sold mead. They found mead that we could sell. And we served popcorn because my house manager was smart enough to say that's a quiet snack so that we won't have to listen to rappers being unfurled there. Um, and then the guitar, you asked about the harp. I don't play the harp, so
Right.
but I do play guitar. And that was a fun thing to do because there are places in Beowulf where, right after one of his first adventures, um, this harp player and singer for Hrothgar immediately starts playing music and making up this incredibly complicated alliterative verse about Beowulf and what he had just done. Um, so again, to a place of, well, what is this like for us? And that's what helped me decide. I learned the Ballad of John Henry years ago from a blues musician I was working with, and I was like, oh, I could do the Ballad of John Henry here. That's like a heroic tale that's American, you know. Um, then even later, I thought, oh, this is actually great for like to take a breather between acts, essentially. If there's three big events, we could have two breathers and I'll just play a song. So I wrote a song about kind of about a Scandinavian winter. I don't know. It was just a reason to enjoy the night and help people sort of go to the bathroom and get their drinks and then come back for the last part, you know. But it helped us, I think, make everybody feel like the event was not formal. Like we're not at church. It's not, it's sacred to me, but sacred doesn't necessarily mean that you all need to be in rows and be quiet, you know. So I think it really helped with the show. And by the second drink, everybody was ready to sing along, you know, so that was fun too.
Well, you can be casual in church even. So,
I guess you
you're
can. Yeah, I guess you can.
right these days.
I
So, right.
I saw the first production. How do you think the
I'm sorry. I sound like somebody
I
was asking a question. Yeah.
this is Bruce.
Brennan asked.
Oh, hey Bruce. Yeah.
I saw the your first production of it at Jaw.
Mhm.
What how was it different the second time?
Oh, so when we remounted it, it was amazing. From an
Because
actor point of view.
I loved what I saw. It was so powerful.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much. The structure of the show did not change. You know, we wanted to remount it, and we felt like the show worked. But as an actor, I had an amazing opportunity, which because I wrote it, and then we're rehearsing it, and then but during that first production, the last 2 weeks of rehearsal, we started making changes and adjusting stuff. So if there was a joke, you know, we'd have to like work on the setup and the punchline of the joke, and we and everything was going so fast. I didn't always have time to write those changes down, right? Um, or, you know, after 2 weeks of the run, I'm still working through it on stage and seeing what works and what lands. And I was able to sort of edit as I went so that by the last week, the show was not entirely what the script was. But because, you know, me and the stage manager and the director, we were sort of all there, we all trusted each other to get it done, right? But
First
for the re
folio, second folio.
indeed, right? So for the remount, I actually had the opportunity to take 3 different videos of shows from that last week because we always sort of videotape the show for grant proposals and grant requests, right? And I was able to go through line by line with the script and go, oh, I changed that. I can do this, or oh, Chris cut this section. So we were able to like clean the language up, and I learned a lot about the difference between when I'm writing a script, how I think, and how I actually think on stage, which was kind of kind of crazy, you know. Little changes, you know, little things here and there, but it's, you know, there's a point in acting in plays written by other people where the struggle with really owning it is there's a point where it's like this character does not think like me, and you have to really work towards shifting, you know, how you process thoughts to get to where your character is. And this, I got to do the reverse. I got to go, oh, it's actually me, and I think like this. So I get to update the script so that I'm happy. But it was fun. But structurally, the show didn't change. It would have been it would have felt like the same show that you had seen.
Is this something you see going on the road or doing other places, or have you already done it other places?
I have not done it other places, but I hope so. You know, the discussion they're having discussions right now with Chesapeake Shakespeare Company in Baltimore. The managing director came to see the show, and oh, I don't know if this is public yet, but here we are. But she's been very kind about talking about whether or not we can get it up there. And it's I don't know if any of you have made it up to Baltimore to see a show there. It's a beautiful space they have. I love that stage.
And
Uh,
they each year they give us tickets at the gala auction. I love them.
oh, that's fantastic. Yes, good, good. Then I hope some people have been there. So I really want to make that work, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work. It's just so much bigger than the room I was in. And that's the first time we had to think, oh, okay, where do we hang the guitars? And how do we get, is this map big enough? You know, we had a map behind me during the show that I referred to occasionally. So that's sort of the stuff we're talking about. Conveniently, they do have a bar in the room that stays open during the show. So that's already done.
Um, you may find this strange, but I always sort of had a little bit of sympathy with Grendel's mother,
Ah,
because she lost her son, and uh, her mourning, and but I was wondering, how did you deal with Grendel and the dragon, the monster, Grendel's mother? How did you deal with those relationships that are, I think, very important in the poem?
man, that's a great question. And I've seen many adaptations and even heard adaptations where um, concern about the Grendel family sort of just becomes front and center. Um, the more we worked on it, these questions came up a lot in the workshopping stage. The more we worked on it, the more we realized if we want to tell the original story, uh, this is a monster story. And if the monsters suddenly have pathos and is something that you can um, f defend, then it no longer becomes a monster story. Then it's a complicated sort of kind of Shakespearean story. But this poem is folklore. It's a heroic tale. And so I feel like we couldn't defend the Grendels in the same way that we can't defend, Scylla and Charybdis in the Odyssey, right?
Right.
Like Scylla, I think, grabs six sailors immediately and just eats them. That's not a good thing in the world. And so what helped was just returning to the original text and asking ourselves, because there's a lot of questions about it. There's a lot of this Maria Devana Headley translation, which I adore, very much asks a lot of questions about the text, about who is Grendel's mother and is she a monster at all, And the more we got closer and closer to the manuscript and what the words actually meant, the more we were convinced these are monsters, right? Grendel is described as a creature who is incredibly tall, like much bigger than anybody. And if anybody doubts that, his first action in Herod is to pick up 30 people and shove them in a bag and then take them to wherever he lives to eat them, right? And that is a gigantic thing. It's described as having claws, and when his head finally gets cut off later, it takes four people to pick it up. It's so heavy. Um, so my feeling is the mother of that creature is not just going to be, a woman, right? Who we can empathize with, right? And we do a lot of anthropomorphizing when we're telling stories, and I think a
Hmm.
little bit of that happens in the poem, where it's like there's an idea in the poem that Grendel's mother is coming for revenge. Maybe, but I don't think Grendel's mother is somebody that you can sit down and reason with or negotiate with or they had the Were Guild with that if you killed somebody in somebody else's family, rather than die, as punishment, you could pay the price that they put on that person's life. That's not something she was going to do. She was also a monster, right? And she goes in and picks a grown man up, right? And runs off with him and eats him. Yeah. So so it's easier, I think, if as a monster story to say, okay, so these adaptations are out there, that's great, but let's get back to the source. And the source is these are monsters. And you may not want to fight them, but if you want your community to survive, you have to. And to me, there's a big message in there for us. And I'm really glad you asked the question because that became a big theme in the show. Um, was that
Current
somewhere
monsters.
in the folk understanding of the world where we tell fairy tales, um, and I think the reason we tell fairy tales is that monsters do exist, and we can read books like the Talented Mr. Ripley and have our anti-hero narrator,
Hmm.
But Ripley's a monster, in that story. He's not a good person, right? So, where was I going with that? Oh, and then I found a quote by there's an idea that's been passed around in literature circles, and a lot of people paraphrase it or think they're quoting him or think they're quoting somebody else, but they're actually quoting G.K. Chesterton. And I can't remember the actual quote, but I will paraphrase it, where he said, "We tell fairy stories and fairy tales not to convince children that monsters and dragons are going to actually come out and be there. We tell these stories so that children know they can be beaten." And that became a big theme in the play, and I was really grateful to encounter that thought as we were working on it.
That's rather grim.
No pun intended.
Sure,
Right.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
But
uh,
I thought that was so much the message of the production I saw about there are monsters now, and there are
Yeah,
mount. So to go back to Gary's suggestion of taking it on the road, there's lots of little places that would be glad to be charged up by your message right
thank
now.
you. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was wondering maybe if you would do the setup for what you're going to do now, maybe and do a segment of the program, but
Oh, sure.
set it up for people so they know, where you are and what it is. And
Okay. Yeah, great. All right. And if anyone here is new to Beowulf, I'm going to do the best I can to set this up. All right. I decided to start a little bit later. I feel like most people who encounter this do encounter Grendel and Grendel's mother. And a lot of people I talked to when I was working on it felt like that was what the story was. And um, many people forget that there's this dragon at the end. And the Grendel stories are exciting. I love doing those every night. But all of it to me was working up towards what was happening with this dragon at the end of the poem. So the setups I think we need here are that when Beowulf goes to fight Grendel, he's about 20 years old, and he's a young man in Geatland, which is currently what we call Sweden, who goes to Denmark to fight Grendel, right? So he's actually not even taking care of his own people. He just hears that there are people in distress and he goes to help, right? And we liken this in the show to Eddie Aikau, who's a famous Hawaiian surfer who, we talk about in the show. I won't get into it too much here, but Eddie Aikau, um, you see quotes from him all over Hawaii if you ever visit Hawaii. And the quote you see all the time is Eddie would go because he was a lifeguard who saved everybody he tried to rescue. He saved, that was like 500 people. Um, so he's a sort of state hero in Hawaii. Um, and so that became a resonating thing is that when Beowulf heard that somebody was in trouble, he would stand up and say, I'll go. I want to help, right? Um, so that's one setup there. The other thing is, I think I mentioned that all the kings and queens in the Beowulf story that are worth anything, that people actually want to defend, these are people who are very generous. So they don't sit and hoard their wealth. You hear about hoards or collections of treasure, but they're constantly giving that stuff away, and there's a real exchange with loyalty and friendship and all of this stuff. There's a belief among the culture in the poem that um, hoarding it would make it useless, and you want it to be useful, right? Uh, and what else do I have to set up? I think that's about it. There's a lot of twists and turns that sort of lead to this. Um, but right before this moment, what we end up hearing, we hear about Beowulf's return home. We hear about how his king in Geatland dies and his son dies, and then Beowulf becomes the king of the Geats, which is a surprise to him and everybody around him. But we hear that he is a good king, um, very generous, shares, protects everybody. And then 50 years go by and we have this new problem. And this is the point in the show where I would do a song and tell everybody to get a drink before we start this next bit. Yeah. So that's the setup. Yeah. How we doing, Gary?
Go for it.
All right. So I'll get back here. You'll see a little bit more of me here. Let me see. Yeah. Without too much of my dirty sunroom. Okay. So 50 years go by. And then in the distance of Beowulf's land, something stirs. There is a barrow on the coast that is full of treasure, an unimaginable amount of treasure. No one knows how it got there, but there are lots of ideas. One thought is that there was a people long, long, long ago, much long ago than even this story started, way back before that baby in the boat I talked about at the beginning of the story. And this people amassed an amazing collection of things, and for whatever reason, the population started to dwindle. You know, maybe there was a plague, maybe they moved on to brighter pastures. We don't know. Maybe the population just dwindled until there was one person left. And this person, knowing he was the last person, built this huge barrow and put all of this treasure inside, hoping that one day somebody might find it and it would all be useful again. And then, being the last person, he eventually dies. Maybe didn't even lock the door. And this treasure lay there for ages and ages until from the air, a dragon, yes, a dragon, gets a glimpse of something shiny. And you know dragons, right? Well, I hope you know of dragons and don't have all the complications that come from meeting one. But this dragon sees this glint and races down toward it, bursts open the door, gets himself inside there, nestles himself in there, and then decides, as much as a beast can decide anything, that all of this treasure now belongs to him and him alone. And then he goes to sleep and dreams of keeping this treasure forever. Now, like I said, this was a long time ago. By the time Beowulf is king, this dragon has been hoarding this treasure for 300 years. And then a piece of accidental luck, rotten luck, brings an accidental thief to the dragon's door. Now, this thief is not a thief by nature. He's just a man in dire straits, owes another man quite a bit of money, right? This is the kind of debt that either some impossible sum or your life would pay, right? So, not a thief, but a hard luck case to be sure. Let's call him Doug. So Doug's out in the country. He's probably hiding because he doesn't want anybody to tip off his creditors to his whereabouts, right? And, you know, maybe one night he needs shelter and he sees this barrow and he doesn't know what's in there, right? So he goes inside, right? And he's walking inside and then he trips over something, clink, clink. It's curious. Moves his foot again, clink, clink. Keeps going and then he sees it. Wall to wall, floor to ceiling, the place is loaded with treasure. And Doug thinks, oh my gosh, my ship has come in. And he goes in a little further, and then he sees a dragon. And Doug thinks, no, thank you. And Doug backs up, and he backs up, and he's thinking, okay, I'm just going to get out of here, and I'm backing up the way I came, and clink. Ooh, there's that cup I tripped on when I walked in. Okay. Well, who's going to miss that, right? I can pay off my debts with this. And he grabs the cup and then he runs out of the barrow and now he's a thief. Okay. So the dragon immediately wakes up. And this is probably a good place for us to stop and consider what a dragon is. You see, like I said before, I worry that we may have lost some things in the long ages between the first time this story was told and now. We may have lost something, okay? Our current storytelling worlds are full of really cool dragons, right? There are dragons you can train. There are dragons who want to talk to you. There are dragons who want to help you become your best self. And these are great stories. I love them. But here is what a dragon is. A dragon can be very big. This one is 50 feet long, at least, with the body of a serpent and legs and wings that are big enough to carry a 50-foot long serpent with legs into the air, and it breathes fire, and it is ferocious. It is not to be trusted, not to be trifled with, and I am sorry, most certainly not to be trained. And that's all good to know, especially if you're about to fight one. But to me, here is the scariest thing about a dragon. A dragon is a creature that spends all of its time looking for gold and treasure, amassing as much of it as it can possibly find so that it can then sit on it for all of time. A dragon is the exact opposite of all these kings and queens we've been talking about all night who share their wealth and generously give things away. A dragon is so greedy, so possessive, so jealous, so utterly without compassion, it will not part with any of its fortune, not even a single cup that might save a man's life. And that's all Doug took. One cup. So the dragon wakes up immediately and loses its mind. It sees the tracks of this trespasser, follows it, runs outside, circles the mound over and over again to no avail, runs back inside, tearing the place apart, trying to find this cup, working himself up into a frenzy until he finally flies up into the sky and ruins this country. The dragon, like a moving inferno, flies over fields, over towns, over farms, over harbors, reducing all below to embers. Nothing and no one in its path survived. For all the rest, fear was all that remained. This creature was so upset about losing a single cup, it burned everything. Because he could not have all of his loot, no one could have anything. The people were in agony, under constant nightly assault. Even Beowulf's home was burned to the ground. So here he is, Beowulf, 70 years old, in the unthinkable. After so many triumphs, the unthinkable has happened. He looks about at the desolation and he knows what needs to be done. But who could do this? Who could fight a 50-foot long serpent that breathes fire and live, let alone win? Beowulf takes a deep breath and he stands up and he says, I'll go. His first order is to his blacksmiths. He has them make him an iron shield. The ordinary wooden ones wouldn't stand a chance against this. And then he picks 11 of his thanes to go with him on this journey. And then he hears about this thief, Doug. And he finds Doug and he makes Doug lead them to this barrow. Now, Doug is not thrilled, right? But he's a survivor, right? So he's going to go, he's going to lead them, and they make this long journey out to the coast. And then Doug gets as close as he dares and he says, okay, you see that? That mound over there? That's it. And he takes off. And now Beowulf sits on the cliff, staring out at the barrow, and he feels a great sadness. This feels like an end to him, but he cannot say yet how or why. He says to his guys, I have seen some things. I have survived some things, so many fights. This might be. And he stands up and says, Fate will go as she must. And he tells them, you guys stay here. This is going to be rough. And he marches down to fight this dragon alone. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger there. Yeah.
You're going to have, thank you. You're going to have to do the show again so everybody now can come and find out how it ended.
Right. Tune in next week.
So,
Yeah. Thank you
are
all.
there
Thank you so
any
much.
questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have time for a couple questions if there are any. See, everybody's so astounded by that they're speechless.
Oh, come on. All right. Thank you.
But
This is
it's very, very true. It is very true. Thank you, Gary, for thinking of this. It is tremendous performance and a tremendous work that you did making it. I am so moved again. We wonder how we can get a copy of the video. No.
this is Trudy from Taiwan.
Good morning. Hi.
And I'm not going to do video because I've been up for way too many hours. And I missed the start of this. Marcus, did you talk about how we almost didn't have Beowulf? How the one manuscript almost was destroyed?
We didn't get to that. That's right. That's a very exciting detail in all of this. As much as I've worked on this, and I should know this because I read it over and over again in every translation, I don't know when the manuscript was discovered. Um, I want to say
About
the idea,
1500.
yeah. Um, and the
And then
idea,
it goes dark for another couple hundred years.
right, and it ends up in the Cotton Library, which is the name of the lord of the house that it was in, right? And then there was a fire in this house. And I don't know what possessed anybody to, I guess they tried to get as many of the manuscripts and the books out of there as they could, but the edges of Beowulf are singed now. And it's old paper. I have some of the one of the facsimiles we were using of the manuscript, and you can see how the edges, I know my camera won't focus on this for some reason, but the edges of it, you see how much text is lost here in some of these pages, and this is what the translators are having to deal with. Sometimes there's a burn mark in the middle of the page, and I think for the longest time, this was dealt with as sort of a neat piece of antiquity. Um, and it was later translators who were like very interested in it as an example of old English writing. And eventually it was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and was inspired very much by this. He's the one who was teaching his class, his Old English class at Oxford, who finally wrote an essay that was like, this is an amazing story. Like we really need to like the languages. Yes, we have to deal with Old English and all that, but this story is amazing, and then everybody really started to take the story more seriously after that moment. But yeah, there's can't remember their names. There's two, there was a father-son team from Iceland who actually went and um, wrote down as much of it as remained after the Cotton Fire, purely on a research level. They just wanted to have a copy that they could take back to Iceland. But as the manuscript kept disintegrating and losing edges, then the newer translators would look at it and go, "Oh, we don't know what this word is," and they'd have to contact these people in Iceland to find out what did you copy there. So the whole story, there's only one manuscript. We don't know who decided to save it or why. I think there's a couple of other Old English songs in that book that are not necessarily by the Beowulf poet. Um, the fact that we have it at all is amazing. Thank you for bringing that up, Trudy. I really appreciate that.
Of all the translations, which one do you like the best?
Oh, definitely Seamus Heaney,
Me
Unstoppable.
too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely my favorite. Yeah. There are things to like in most of them. The Norton one is a little weird. I'm reading that one now. And it's, you think Norton Critical Edition, right? That's going to be hopefully one of the best, but it's very scholarly. Like it's one of these pragmatic, almost too literal translations. It's utterly devoid of poetry. And Seamus Heaney had such a vision with poetry, that it's unstoppable. I love it.
Well, and it's big and square and sort of captures the character of Beowulf himself, I think. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I appreciate that in the I don't know if they do it all the time now, but when it came out, the copy I have has the Old English on the left side and his translation on the right. And so that's nice to see. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's about time. We got time for one more question. If you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask it.
Gary, this is Ken Jarbo.
Yeah, go
I
ahead,
have a
Ken.
I have a quick question. When you talked about not going down the road of viewing Grendel as the anti-hero, did you consult any books about that? For example, the John Gardner, I think it's 1970 novel, Grendel?
I appreciate that question. I have not read that book, and I don't want anybody to think I'm afraid of it. But because we were working so furiously on getting this adaptation right, once we got to the point where we decided the monster story is what's important, we felt like, okay, we're only going to deal with, like, Seamus Heaney's goal is to tell the story, right? And not interpret the story. And that was our goal with it. So there's a lot of books. I want to read The Mere Wife, I want to read John Gardner's book. I'll still watch any number of these horrible movies, that come out about it. And I'm sure John Gardner's book is great. It's we put a line in the show actually that these stories that they're circulating are wonderful, but the goal was to try and tell the original story. So I look forward to reading that. It sounds like you have and enjoyed it, and I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Okay, it's the old clock on the wall says it's 8 p.m. and I think someone said the other day one of the good things about this program is it's only an hour.
Ah!
So
Yes. Well, yeah, that's good because I talk about Beowulf all night if you want. So
right. So anyway, let's give Marcus a little hand here, and sort of to end things, just remind you, keep an eye out for Monday, September 14 at 7 p.m., and we'll see all of you then. Have a good, safe summer, and look forward to seeing all of you in the fall.
Right.
Good night.
Thank
thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Really wonderful.
Mhm.